Hi everyone, in today's video we are going to learn coordinate geometry, and in coordinate geometry we are going to learn reflection. Now what is coordinate geometry? Coordinate geometry is a branch of mathematics which helps us to study geometry with the application of algebra. Now I have taken a graph sheet and I have drawn two lines. One is horizontal and another is vertical. When a plane like this has two lines intersecting at one point, then we can locate any point on the graph using these two lines. This system is called Cartesian coordinate system. And in Cartesian coordinate system, this horizontal line that I have drawn is called the x-axis. And the vertical line that I have drawn is called the y-axis. The point where these two lines or the two axes meet is called the origin. So 0 here is called the origin. Now these two lines divides the whole graph paper into 4 quadrants. Any point on these quadrants can be located by knowing the distance of that particular point from the x-axis and from the y-axis. Now, on the right hand side of this origin, the values of x will be positive, and I have shown here this as x, and on the left hand side the values will be negative and it is shown as x dash or x prime. On top of this x-axis, that means above this origin, the values of y will be positive, and below the x-axis the values of y will be negative. Now I have marked numbers 1, 2, 3, 4 at equal distances on either side of this origin, as well as on top and below this x-axis. On the right hand side I have marked positive 1, 2, 3, 4, and on the left hand side I have marked negative minus 1, minus 2, minus 3, and minus 4. Likewise, above this line I have marked positive 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and below this one I have marked minus 1, minus 2, minus 3, minus 4, minus 5. So this forms our Cartesian coordinate system. Now this helps us to locate any point on this particular graph paper. Suppose, for example, if I consider this point, say suppose P in the graph sheet, then the location of this can be exactly pinpointed by knowing its distance from the x-axis and its distance from the y-axis. Now what I have done is I have joined the point P with the x-axis and with the y-axis. Now the location of this point P can be given by an ordered pair xy, where x is the distance of this point P from the y-axis as shown here as x, and y is the distance of this point from the x-axis as shown here as y. So this ordered pair xy is called the coordinate point of the point P. So if you look at the graph properly, then the distance here, the x is 2 units from the origin or from the y-axis, and the distance y is 3 units from the x-axis. So the coordinate of this point P can be written as 2, 3 in a sequence, which is called the ordered pair. So this becomes the coordinate of the point P. We shall now learn the reflection of this point under various conditions. Let's look at the first condition. Suppose here the point P is reflected through the x-axis. That means virtually the x-axis acts as the mirror. Now we know that when reflection takes place, this is the object, and if suppose this is the mirror, then the image will be formed on the other side of the mirror such that the distance remains the same. So here we are looking at reflection of this point P along the x-axis. So you may imagine that this x-axis behaves like the mirror, so the image will be formed at similar distance behind the mirror. So where will the image will be formed? Image will be formed at this point, such that this point is P dash. Now what will be the coordinate of this point? Let the coordinate of this point P dash be alpha comma beta. But as I told you that this distance will remain the same. This distance will remain the same. What is this distance? This is the value of y. So the value of y remains the same. What is this value? This value also is the value of x. This also remains the same. But what changes actually takes place? Though this is 3 units above the x-axis, and this is also 3 units, but this is below the x-axis. So the value of beta is negative 3, whereas if you look at x, then x here is only 2 units, and this side also remains 2 units, and on the right hand side remains positive only. So the coordinate of this P dash will be 2 comma minus 3. So what do we see here? Whenever reflection of this point P takes place in the x-axis, the x coordinate known as abscissa remains unchanged. The value remains unchanged. The sign also remains unchanged. Whereas the coordinate of this y, which is known as ordinate, the magnitude remains the same, the value remains the same, but the sign reverses or changes. If it is positive, then it becomes negative. So we can consider this point P dash and reflect it along the x-axis. Then what will happen? When we reflect it through x-axis, then the image will be formed on this side, the other side of the mirror. So P is the reflection of the object P dash, where the abscissa remains unchanged, but the sign of the ordinate changes. So that's first. Second one, what if the point P is reflected through the y-axis? Suppose we consider y as the mirror. Then the image of P will be formed exactly at same distance, but on the other side of this line. So if you look at this one, this is 2 units from the y-axis. So the image of this one will also be formed at the same distance here. That means, suppose if this is P double dash, then what will be the coordinate of P double dash? Suppose this is alpha comma beta. Then if you look at this one, this remains unchanged. That means the coordinate of y remains unchanged. That means it will remain 3. But what happens to this value? The value of x? Its sign changes to negative. So it becomes minus 2 comma 3. So when reflection of a point takes place through y-axis, then the ordinate remains unchanged, but the sign of the abscissa changes to negative. So in this small video we have learned that the reflection of the point P xy in x-axis is the point P dash whose coordinates are x comma minus y. That means the abscissa remains unchanged, the sign of the ordinate changes. And number 2, the reflection of the point Pxy in y-axis is the point P double dash whose coordinates are minus x comma y. That means the ordinate remains the same, the sign of the abscissa changes.